Hello.
Hello.
Good morning on this bright and sunny Sunday. Good to see you here today. And welcome everybody online following us on YouTube, on Facebook, or afterwards. We'd like to start with an invitation to our Gospel at Home. We have our Welcoming and Assistance department here at FSS, and we help everybody and anybody who wants to implement the Gospel at home. It's a very recommended practice that we have in Spiritism to help with our own internal environment and the environment of our house, and so on. So if you don't practice it, or if you did, and for some reason you don't anymore, reach out to us and we can help you out, set it up, and start doing this practice. And to start our day today, we're going to read a text from the book The Living Spring from Francisco Xavier, and it's question 100 it's chapter 166, entitled "Let Us Follow Him," and it's a passage from Jesus in John chapter 8, when Jesus says, "Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness." And Emmanuel brings the reflection, saying that there are those who wonder at Christ's glory, but pure and simple wonder may turn into useless ecstasy. There are those who believe in the Lord's promises. However, this belief by itself may generate fanatism and strife. There are those who defend Jesus' revelation. Nevertheless, defense considered in isolation may lead to sectarianism and blindness. There are those who trust the Divine Master. However, stagnant trust may be an inert force. There are those who wait for the eternal benefactor. Nevertheless, expectancy without work may be useless anxiety. There are those who praise the Savior. Praise by itself, however, may become unproductive adoration. The word of the heavenly messenger is clear and incisive. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. If you have loved the gospel, do not place yourself outside of Christian service. Seek the Lord, following his footsteps. That is the only way we will be with Christ, receiving his magnificent light. So let us close our eyes in prayer. And today, we ask you, Jesus, our Master, to be with us, to inspire us, and to help us on this day in special. Feel compassion and feel love towards ourselves, all of those who have thought or who have committed suicide. We ask Jesus that we can pour our hearts out, and compassion and love can emanate from our hearts. And in this talk today, we ask you to inspire all of us so we can learn from you, understand a little bit more about suicide. So we're prepared to love and to feel compassion for all of us. I'd like to also thank the Lord for our presence here today, for this group, and for this blessed Sunday and this hour that we have in communion with you. May we find in here the beacon, the light that inspires us and guides us in our journey forever and ever. So be it. Great. Thank you. And I wasn't here last week, and I heard that there was a lot of participation from everybody last week, so yeah. I would like to encourage that as well today. I even I'm planning on talking less, just to give everybody some space. And again, that's not only for everyone here, but everyone online. Please share with us your comments or questions as we go along, and Carol will be watching that, so you can virtually participate. And yesterday was the International Day of Suicide Prevention, September 10th. So today we will be talking about this topic, about suicide. And we always like to bring the idea of cherishing life, that everything that we discuss here, everything that we bring, is about cherishing the life that we have. And as we'll see with Spiritism, we all have a life that doesn't end. So the focus is to cherish the today, to cherish our lives, and in doing so, we'll be talking about suicide prevention. And the topic here today is finding comfort in Spiritism, what this doctrine can bring us to find comfort in when going through tough times that might lead us to think about suicide. And suicide is it's a bit of a pandemic around the world. We lose roughly 700,000 lives every year. That's almost one person every 40 seconds. So it's a quite staggering number. And so the idea and the goal is through awareness, through understanding, that we can help prevent it. And in Canada, for example, we have roughly 4,000 lives being taken by suicide. That's around 11 people every day. And it's the second leading cause in youth death. So awareness is much needed for this. And we hope throughout this talk to be able to be the most compassionate as we possibly can, because it is a very delicate topic that can touch many different people in many different ways. Some of us might have thought of it, some of us might have tried it, some of us might have committed it in previous lives. And so it's something that can, again, touch people in very different ways. And since we're finding comfort in Spiritism, we went to some of the Spiritist sources to find inspiration for this talk. And we always like bringing some reflections from Artur Valadares in his talk, Immortality of the Soul. Sandro as well, Depression, Suicide, and Challenges in Life that he brought us. And then we have quite a few books. Also, a few. It's a virtual program from FEB TV, which is the Spiritist Federation of Brazil, called Between Two Worlds, and the topic that they were talking about was suicide. And then we also have the Spiritist Doctrine and the Gospel of Jesus. So we've got quite a few sources here to help us bring this together and talk about this topic. So I was thinking about how to start talking about this, and then I heard Sanina in my mind saying that when you don't know how to start, always start and end with Jesus. So here we go. This is how we're starting today. And Jesus, especially when we're going through tough times, he can inspire us, and he can bring a lot of hope in our hearts. So much so that in John 8 he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Right? And for some of us who have prayed with Jesus, some of us who have learned from his words might have already felt this in the past. So he wasn't lying to us. He is certainly the light of the world, and in him we can find light in our lives. And Emmanuel brought us a great reflection about this specific verse from the Gospel, when Emmanuel was reminding us of the service in Jesus' words, so we can take his words and put them to practice. That is the way to truly follow Christ. And when we look at a few of Spiritist books that we have to help us understand a little bit more about immortality, we have Emmanuel in a book called Recados do Além, or Notes from Beyond. It's a small snippet of a spirit who has committed suicide, and then when he's in the spirit world, he asks, what happened to death? What happened? Why is it that I'm still living? So he asks, my God, where is the death that I entered? And then he says that a voice, however, answered him in his ears of his deep conscience and says, my son, you may come out of death as many times as necessary, but out of life never. So we can try death, but we'll always come out of it in life. We can never end our lives, which will be the backbone of what we'll be talking about today. Is immortality, is what the immortality of the soul, which is what Spiritism brings us, and all the reflections that we can make around it to help us understand how to face our issues, our tribulations when we go through life. And the whole idea of awareness, the whole idea of understanding a little bit more about it, is that again, Jesus, so in the same passage, in the same chapter, just a little bit later, he says, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So a lot of people who are thinking of suicide or have tried it, they feel entrapped, they feel imprisoned. And then the understanding, the knowledge of the truth, such as immortality, can certainly set us free from it. And so these are some of the reflections from Christ around this topic. And again, I invite everybody to, I'll be asking questions hopefully throughout the talk, but please feel free to chime in and join us.
Yeah, just would like to know, from where did you take this text from?
This one?
The last
one. It's called, in English, it would be Notes from Beyond, and in Portuguese, it's Recados do Além. Yes.
From Francisco Xavier?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And this
from
is
Emmanuel.
From Emmanuel?
Yeah.
It's great, yeah. It makes us understand that
the difference between that, I mean, for me, was like, okay, like you can die, your body can die, but your life is beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the body, right? So,
yeah, exactly. And it's an interesting book because it's literally recados. It's really literally notes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like 5-6 phrases.
Oh.
It's not a full text. It's just notes.
That's great.
Yeah. So this, for example, had I think 5 lines.
And that's what this is the great option that the Spiritism gives to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It opens this door for us to understand what is after.
Yeah.
Right? It's not only this world, but makes us understand there's much more than that we think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk more about this, but that's absolutely where we want to go today, because the perspective that brings can change everything. And this little snippet is from the note called Immortality. And so we'll be talking about a little bit about the Spiritist doctrine and what it can teach us about suicide. And we've done a few workshops around suicide, and we've brought this already in the past. In question 957 of the Spirit's book, Kardec asks, with regards to the state of the spirit, what are the consequences of suicide in general? All right, we're not talking about the specifics, but in general, what would be the consequences of suicide? And I love the way the Spirits answer, because they say the consequences of suicide are very diverse, right? They're not going to spend time to dissect it and say exactly what it is. And the reason is because there are no specific penalties, and in all cases they always correspond to the causes that produced it. So it's not that, when you commit suicide, there is a consequence that you can say, this is going to happen, because it's not the suicide itself that will dictate any of the consequences, but everything that led to the suicide, which is what they're saying here. Right? It's based on the causes that produced, that led us to commit suicide, and that's what will dictate what sort of learnings that will be invited to take afterwards. However, there is one consequence which the suicide cannot escape, and that is disappointment. Everyone who commits suicide is encountered with disappointment, which is an internal feeling. Why would that be? Right? Why would we be disappointed? And the reason for the disappointment is because the thing that we were seeking with suicide wasn't met. It wasn't there. The thing that we were hoping to achieve with suicide, we can never achieve. Without getting into many details on the sources or on the reasons why, one of the main things that we're looking with when somebody commits suicide, one of the things that most of us are looking for is to relieve ourselves from the pain, right? Is to find a solution to a problem that we're going through. And there's a book by Alirit Sekerafidu that's called Suicide, the False Solution. Because that solution that we're seeking in suicide, we can never find it. And that makes us very disappointed. The other reason that was actually brought into that talk from Fed TV was one of the questions from the audience was, what happened with those who, in some areas of the world, in some religions, they kill themselves in something bigger, such as like a bomb person or a kamikaze or something like that. That they're committing suicide because they're being promised something else in later life. That they're being promised to be met by things that they seek. And so again, when they commit that kind of suicide, they don't encounter on the other side the everything that was promised to them. So regardless of what drove someone to commit suicide, they will be found with disappointment. That's the one thing that we can say that applies to all cases.
Yeah, I love the same statement that you did. Like it's important to understand that it's not one consequence. Like the law, the cause and effect law, it's not simplistic.
Yeah.
Like it depends on what you have done, the cause, like what's your intention.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because above all laws, there is one law, the law of love, that take care and see deeply what is the best way to teach that person, to help them to understand and comply with the law.
Perfect, Sonia. We all have different ways of learning, and
Yes, exactly.
and the only one who knows the best way to teach us is God. And in His mercy, He brings us our trials and expiations in a way that is tailored to us, because He knows how we learn. And I believe it was Sonia who brought this in one of our Cherishing Life workshops, and it's from this book here, the Gospel, according to Spiritism, on chapter 5, when there's a text that talks about suicide and madness, or locura. And there's two passages here that I wanted for us to reflect upon a little bit, which talks a little bit about what Spiritism brings to us with regards to suicide, and how can we utilize Spiritism to help us not fall into this. So he says that the calm and resignation acquired in the way of considering earthly life and the confidence in the future give the spirit a serenity that is best at preventing madness and suicide. So we're saying, or Kardec is saying here, that when we consider our earthly life from the view of Spiritism, when we start to see earthly life as just a passage in a never-ending journey, right? We start to change the way we look at our lives. We start to give a different perspective on the tribulations that we go through, and we start to put everything into a different perspective. So that reflection gives us also a confidence in the future, because we know through the law of progress that we all will evolve, right? There is no avoiding it. We will evolve, we will improve. So this brings us the confidence in the future whenever we're going through tribulations. These two things can certainly help us give the calm, the resignation, and the serenity that Kardec is telling us here that can prevent suicide or madness in this case that he brings. And again, he keeps on going to say that the believer, those of us who learn from Spiritism and who understand the immortality of life, knows that our existence extends indefinitely beyond the grave, but under very different conditions. This creates the patience and resignation that very naturally keep him from thinking about suicide. In other words, it builds our moral courage, and I love that term, our moral courage. So it gives us the courage to, when we're going through tough times, to give us the strength to understand that we can get through it. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get through it today, but just the idea of knowing that that pain will pass, knowing that I will be able to one day succeed, helps us be more patient and endure sometimes the pain that we're feeling at the moment. And that is the moral courage that is something that we build within ourselves, right? Something that it's a stepwise approach, but with the reflections and the experiences that we go through life, basically implementing the immortality of life in our reflections, it can build this courage in our morals. Now, let's not be mistaken with one thing. Even though we have this knowledge, even though we reflect about immortality, even though we call ourselves Spiritists, we're not immune to suicide, right? The feelings and the depression and so many other factors that lead to suicide, we're not immune to it whatsoever at all. We have the tools that help us perhaps protect us, but it won't shield us from it. Yeah, Jude.
Hi. My perception also is not saying that even though we know about the spiritual life, we know about our future, that's not it. It doesn't finish here. But we are living in a very materialistic world, right? Everybody, especially this society. Brazil, we know that is a country that is, it's very, the faith is very strong, right? We have different faiths in Brazil, Catholics, evangelicals, Spiritism. But here, sometimes I feel like shocked at how people, they don't believe in anything. They just believe that we're just here for this life and then it's done, nothing else, right? And then this week, my neighbor, she sent me a post about the CFO from Bed Bath & Beyond saying, Bed Bath & Beyond, the CFO jumps to his death after struggling retailer forced to close 150 stores. So he killed himself, right? So I was just reading briefly, I didn't know about this, but I was just briefly reading what happened. And apparently he was responsible for one of those schemes that they put a lot of stocks in the market, and then after it's all, I forgot, this Ponzi scheme, something like this?
It could be, yeah.
Something like this. So then just lost millions and millions. And then sometimes it's out of shame, out of so many things, like doesn't know how to get out of this mess, right? And it's very sad because they don't know what comes in next.
Exactly. It is.
And then I see the same thing with a lot of youth because of what I have been going through, and the youth, they don't know, they don't even think about what is beyond this.
Exactly.
And how I keep, every day now I keep thinking what we could do to change at least our circle. Obviously we cannot change the country, we cannot change the world, but a little bit of this, our circle, how we can make the difference to explain or not explain. I don't want to convince because
we can't really
we can't convince anybody, but if we started to show with evidence that is something out there,
they might at least get
because
that
the same thing that I told my kids, well, if there is no God, if there is nothing, what are you doing here? What is your purpose?
I think just one comment in regards to the CEO story you were telling. You see how it's connected for us to understand what the material world means for our happiness, right? Because when you understand the material world is temporary and it's not the focus of your happiness, you can also shift your mind to things that are really important and to understand that there's no death, right? So you understand why you're here, you understand all what everything the Spiritism says about it. But when you focus on the material life, on the material world to seek happiness, then this can become a problem.
Yes, and then, as I'm not sure if I talked to you about this yet, something that hurt me, a comment that Oliver made 2 days ago, because he prefers to be at his friend's house rather than in our house. And then I said, why? You never come home anymore. You don't bring your friend here. You are always going to his house or the other boy's house that they live in the country. He said, because our house is boring, then there's nothing to do. His house, he lives in a country that has so many things to do. And they have like the basement full of stuff, like pool table. I said, well, have you asked yourself why your friend is so much privileged than us? More privileged. Why you were born in this family rather than in other type of families that can provide you more.
Yeah.
But it's also these adolescent minds, as I remember, liking to go to other people's house because it's just different than mine. Maybe it's just like the way they like. Maybe it's not necessarily because he doesn't value what he has, but he doesn't know how to say it, but they're confused in that time too. I always say the other people's grass is always greener.
Yes, but everything is a balance. What I wanted to point to my son is everything is a balance. You are going every time, every week, every weekend to his house. He never comes here. It seems that you are embarrassed of our house. And that is not a balance. So he is in good terms with his parents because he's always there. But you are getting in bad terms with your parents because you are never here.
And maybe his friend would like to go to other people's house too, but just, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's something that they don't realize, right? The difference is why. Like, the point that I'm just sharing this example is, why is that then? If you were unhappy or sad because you were here, because of your reality, why? Ask yourself.
Yeah, I don't know sometimes if they have that.
It's a process of learning. It's a process of learning, and adolescence is a great. It's a great time for learning, and it's usually not contained to ourselves. Anything that we learn in adolescence, we bring it out very drastically sometimes, and certainly can hurt those on the receiving end.
And you're planting the seeds, so eventually he will remember those things and look like, oh yeah, the balance that my mom was talking about. Yeah, there might be a reason for things.
Yeah, eventually it'll sink in. Eventually.
Yeah, I like that, Tim, that you said, Victor, because that reminds me about apprentice feeling. And we are all apprentices here, but in different levels. So sometimes we want that the one that is in grade 1 knows exactly what everything that is being teaching on the grade 6, but they are in grade 1, so we cannot demand that they know something that they need to have the time that helps them.
Yeah, they cannot run before walking.
Yes, exactly. So it's baby steps, and sometimes when we have this apprentice feeling, we have the same feeling towards others, because we know that they are in their time and state, and they will get there. We just need to give them some time. And I can say that by experience, because I had 2 boys, teenagers, that were very hard for me in that time, and now they are parents, very good parents. They have their families. They don't do exactly what I would like that they do, but they are good. They are taking ahead with their lives, and they have their families, and they sometimes they tell me things that I thought that they didn't understand by the time that I was teaching them. And the seed, like Annie saying, is there. One day you bloom. Don't worry.
Yeah,
That's my seed. That's my
That's the seed, though.
My hope.
I know.
Keep cultivating.
And
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm feeling that way too, Julian, I try to remember how I was at their age. I was very confrontational and I'm still that.
I wasn't like this.
But for me, like, I feel like it is like, and what I need to say is like, I was and I'm a less now. Confrontational, impulsive, and so I have changed and I remember my parents saying things to me, they're like, ugh, like rolling my eyes and like, sure, whatever. And now I am trying to, sometimes I catch myself trying to, like, it's the word, using the words to try to make them change when they have not lived the experiences.
Yes.
But
they're not there
I
yet,
don't know,
right?
it's not easy.
I don't want to take go straight from the topic, but it reminds me about the most of our movie, right? Where he also was considered as suicide, right?
Yeah.
Because of his type of life he lived. And then the same thing, like this morning, I was talking to her yesterday. My older son has it's with a terrible cough, like it's horrible. And we know why is the cough, right? And many when looking to the kids said, we have to do something. His cough is just horrible. It seems that he's gonna be out of breath. I said, soon you're gonna be going to the hospital because that's his choice.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's harder to see them hurting themselves, but they don't realize. He just says, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Eventually
maybe he needs to live that experience.
And what you brought about materialism is interesting, because this exact same text, just the next line here over, actually, I didn't bring it, but it says that the propagation of materialism is the venom of our society. And it's honestly why we're here, is to trial us against materialism. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to be here. We would need to incarnate. Materialism is what we're being faced with, and it's our trial. It's whether or not we can do it. It's like our test at school. That is materialism. That's why we came to an earthly world. Right? Now, in his all endless wisdom, Shikshava always used to say something, that everything passes. Right? That deep faith and understanding of immortality, everything passes. And when we're talking about suicide, we have the more common factors that lead to suicide when we're talking about feelings of loneliness, when we don't have a purpose in life, that lack of purpose, or a deep feeling of guilt, or no belief in the afterlife. All those could eventually bring us to a depression, and then it can also cause suicide. So those are the ones that are more, let's say, that takes a little bit more time, that it develops into it. But there's also the other, one of the other causes of suicide that the people from FEB, they called the more of the moments of impulse, which is exactly what you brought about that person who, of something that happens in the moment, they instantly go and commit suicide. And financial troubles, that is one of the parts that can cause this, or inability to deal with stress, problems with relationships, chronic pain, illness, discrimination. There's so many that can also bring us to commit suicide. And the whole reason why we're bringing all of this is that we understand that it's not they and us, or they who commit suicide and us here. It's all of us. It's all of us, right? Because some of us might have thought about it, some of us might have tried, or some of us might have committed suicide in past lives, right? So it's not distancing ourselves, but realizing that we all could have done it, could have tried, and could come to think about it or even commit it, right? We're not immune to it. So again, this brings it back a little bit home to realize the importance of awareness, because Spiritism can't stop us from committing it, but it can certainly bring us the awareness, so that when we identify any of these things that might lead us to commit suicide, we realize it. And that's the important things. Is not say that I won't feel lonely, that I won't fall into depression, but it's realizing that, ooh, I'm feeling like this, so maybe I should take a step back and see what should I do to heal this, so it doesn't develop into something more serious. And these are the things that Spiritism can help us with, right? That reflection, that self-awareness that we're always constantly talking about here. It's something that we all are invited to do. All of us, regardless of background or level of knowledge, or even how much we know about Spiritism. The self-awareness and the self-knowledge is something that we can't contract out. That's how we say it in English. We can't terceirizar. That's how we say it in Portuguese, right?
We always have 3 levels of learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the knowledge, the cognitive knowledge when we are here, getting all this information.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the second level, which is feeling
Mm-hmm.
this information, meaning we need to reflect about it.
Yeah.
Try to, like you said, see ourselves in that situation as well, because it's possible.
Yeah.
We are not immune.
Yeah.
We are vulnerable, and that makes us to feel more confident in God's help,
Yeah.
right? Because we need His protection in order to have the vigilant, like the watching and prayer. And the third level is the living
Living it.
what we learned.
Yeah.
Right?
Putting
So
into practice.
there's always 3 steps,
Sure.
3 levels, and most of the time we think that we know, but then we see ourselves doing exactly the thing that we thought that we knew before. So come on, I know that I shouldn't do that, but I keep doing. Like, it's like Paulo used to say, I don't know if I'm gonna use the correct words, but it says that the evil that I didn't want to do,
Yeah.
I still do.
Yeah.
And the good that I would like to do, I still don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. That was he used to say that in the beginning, and then after he built his patience, his experiences, in the end, he then was actually doing the things that he wanted to do. So yeah, that's a great example, Sunita. And as I was reflecting upon this yesterday, I came with a very rude analogy about our awareness, our evolution morally, and how that can help us see things differently with a different perspective. And I called it the pencil analogy. And I was seeing kids yesterday, seeing babies yesterday made me think of this. So imagine yourself as a kid, let's say, I don't know, 2-year-old, and you have a coloring pencil and you're coloring a drawing. And you're trying to color it, and then the tip breaks and you can no longer color, right? A 2-year-old kid will likely start crying and think it's the end of their world in that moment, because they thought in that moment their lives was to color that drawing. And as soon as the tip breaks, they start crying. Why are they crying? It's because they think, the world is going to end. Because they think their life is what they're doing in that moment, right? A baby, for example, you take a toy away. You take anything away or something breaks, they'll start crying because they think, that moment, that toy, for example, is their lives. All their lives revolves around that toy. And that's because they don't have the perspective of life in that moment. And then let's say we grow up a little bit, so now we're 5 years old, or 6, and we're doing the same thing. We're still coloring that drawing, and then the tip breaks. A 5-year-old won't start crying because they know a little bit more about life. They know their life is not coloring a drawing, it's much more than that. And they won't stop coloring. They'll pick up a sharpener, sharpen the pencil and keep doing it, and keep coloring it. So the analogy here is that not only does the kid have a better knowledge about life, which is what Spiritism is bringing to us here, they have another perspective of life, but they also know of the existence of a sharpener, and they know how to use it. Meaning that when we build our knowledge, especially with Spiritism, when we're going through trying times, we have tools, just like the sharpener, that we can use when we're going through tough times, when something breaks.
Yeah.
We have tools around us to fix it. And then when we're even older, then we can use a pen that the tip no longer breaks, right? And then
Sharp is good for
you're drawing, you can use a Sharpie. So
Sharpies are really good for
in that
coloring.
moment, that trouble won't even phase you anymore. Like that problem won't exist in your life anymore because you've already surpassed it. So this analogy is very rude, but it just brings us the reflection about our perspective around our troubles. Right? So if we understand that life is so much more than today, right? We start to see our problems in a different way. We don't think, my life is going to end if something goes wrong today, right? So it's a perspective thing, and Spiritism with the immortality brings different lenses for our eyes of how we deal and how we see our lives.
And together with these different lenses, if maybe you're going to talk about it now, I don't know, but together with that, if you're practicing gratitude, then you're also switching lenses of your life, right?
Absolutely.
And you see what you have, all the 90% that you already have, and you're focusing on that 1% that you're struggling, right?
Yes. Thank you very much, Carol. I won't talk about gratitude today, but I will next week.
Spoiler
Yeah, it's one of the sharpeners that we can use on a daily basis. And what's another amazing thing that Spiritism can bring to us when talking about going through tough times is the majority of the books, a lot of the books that we have, they bring us experiences from spirits that have, in this case, committed suicide. Examples of spirits that lived tough times and committed suicide, and so we can learn from them. So it's not somebody just telling you, oh, you shouldn't do this because of this. No, it's somebody who's lived it, an experience, and is teaching us from what they felt. Right? It brings us a whole different idea, and it gives a whole different meaning to the teachings that we read and that we reflect about. One of the biggest examples, right, is, I don't know if we have any translated books from her, but her name is Ivone Amaral Pereira. It's a medium in Brazil that a lot of us from Brazil know. And in her previous incarnations, she committed suicide subsequently 3 or 4 times. And then she came in this last incarnation and led a life where she was able to learn everything that she had wronged in her past, especially around suicide. So we have a living example of what's possible, of how great and how beautiful God's mercy is after we commit suicide. So it's not the end in any way, shape, or form, because God in His infinite mercy gives us the ability to restore ourselves and to grow. Joana Genges, who is a spirit that has written many books through Divaldo Pereira Franco, she says that the conscious being no longer guilts themselves and no longer excuses themselves, but take responsibility and transforms themselves. And I don't know if I have time, hopefully I do. I wanted to bring a passage from Paul. We love talking about Paul. And like we said, one of the big leading causes of depression and suicide is the feeling of guilt. And Paul is a great example for us with this, because in that moment when he was in the road to Damascus and he ran into Christ, and Christ showed himself for him, there's a lot that we can reflect about that passage. There's a lot of good things that we can extract from it. And one of the things is, in that moment when Paul saw Christ, he asked Christ, what would you like me to do? So he was focusing on the today and on the tomorrow. He was focusing, okay, what can I do from now on? He could have done 2 other things. He could have fallen into the guilt, realizing all the bad things that he had done in the past, such as, even killing people that were following Christ. He could have looked back at everything that he did in the past and fell into guilt, right? And say, Jesus, I don't deserve your love, or whatever it is. And then he would be just mulching and wouldn't be acting. The other extreme, he could have fallen in the excuse, or trying to justify the things that he did in the past. He could have said, Christ, we were promised the Messiah that would come as a king, as somebody, dressed in gold and all these things. And you came as a woodworker, wearing scraps. So don't blame me, I didn't know that was you. Right? So justifying his actions. But instead of focusing on the past, he focused on the today and the tomorrow. What can I do from now on? Tuvaladar is also always likes to say, the past is a place for reference, never a place for residence. Right? Using our past as a reference, but not stay in the past. Look forward. And after I thought about this, there's a passage from Jesus, and I think all of you can remember, is the one with the, and Sonia, correct me if I say it wrong, but the adulterous woman who's not married. It's that passage when Jesus says, who's never sinned, cast the first stone at this lady who was being punished by these Pharisees. And then at the end of this passage, Jesus is with her, and he's saying, look around you. Nobody condemned you for your past, because in that moment everybody had left. And he said, neither do I condemn you. And he told her, go and sin no more. So just like with Paul, he was telling this lady, don't dwell about the past. Go from now on forward and sin no more. So there's two great examples to show us that, again, we can use past as a reference, but always looking forward, always looking and asking Jesus, what can I do from now on? And so these are great examples that we can count on.
This means that we need to be invited to self-forgiveness.
Exactly. Self-forgiveness for all the things that we've done in the past. And there is, this reminds me of one of the things that we talk, I think in English would be the law of forgetfulness, where when we incarnate on this earth, or reincarnate on this earth, we don't remember about the things from our past. Right? That's a law. It's something that happens to us, that God chose for us to come into this lifetime without knowing of all of the things that we did in the past. And that's for a reason. Right? It's because we are still very imperfect, and we tend to fall into blame. We tend to dwell about the past. So can you imagine if we knew all the things we did in the past? So as a way to protect us, God doesn't let us remember about everything again, so we can move forward and eventually know of it all. And I have just a few more minutes. And brief reflection about this, about a little bit of the stigma that there is around suicide, and those of us who have thought, those of us who have tried, those of us who have committed in the past lives, right? There is still a big stigma around suicide and talking about it. And likely because a lot of what leads to suicide is some mental health issue, right? And we'll talk more about this next week, but there's still a lot of stigma around mental health. We don't like to admit that we have mental health issues. Which is interesting, because if any other part of our body is not working, if I break a foot, right, I have no shame saying that I will go see a physio to help with my foot. But if it's anything with my mind, anything with my brain, then it changes, right? There is still a stigma around, and sometimes people can feel weak by saying that they're going to therapy, or they refute that seeking help for it. So we'll talk a bit more next week, but helping us understand that we're all vulnerable, none of us is immune to it, and that it is for a lot of us, it is part of our lives, right? And that we have the tools that we need to help us through it. Whichever mental health issue that we're going through, we can always find help. And we can always find the love that we need to go through these tribulations. And the tools that Spiritism gives us, right? Especially knowing that, everything passes because life doesn't end. It might not solve it that day, but it can give us hope that eventually it will. And to end, like Sonia said, start and end with Jesus, so bringing him back, he's our hope. Especially, when Paul told us, and this is a great reflection by Abdul, which is linking Christ with the immortality of our lives, which is something that Spiritism brought us. So basically, in the sayings and teachings of Christ, where can we find signs of immortality in what he taught us? And this in particular is not from Christ, it's from Paul. In the first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 15, when he said, "And if Christ had not been raised, our preaching is useless and so is our faith." So in other words, Paul is saying that, if Christ hadn't shown us immortality through his, when he raised from the dead. So if Christ hasn't shown us that immortality exists, all his teachings and all our faith would be useless. So Paul is saying the importance of immortality for us to understand everything that Christ taught us is huge. Right? So it's a piece that kind of brings it all together and helps us make sense of a lot of what Christ taught us. So Paul himself, who knew Christ a lot more than many of us, was able to say this, and he saw that piece of Christ showing us immortality was key to understanding and to give meaning to our faith. And the last one is from Christ himself. He says that he came that we may have life and have it abundantly. So he came us to show a different perspective in life so we can live it to the fullest. And that is all that I had. It's right 12:01. So thank you for your guys' contribution. I appreciate participation. It's always good to have you all with us. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this next week.
Yes. We'll be talking about a little bit more about it
Tomorrow, perfect. Yeah, so we're honoring the September Yellow. So thank you all. And we'll end in a prayer. I'm just seeing that image from Christ in front of us, who came to us to give us life abundantly, who came here to teach us how to learn from our hearts, to become sowers, and to lead by example. We'd like to thank you, Christ, for being here with us, for inspiring all of us. And we ask that in this moment we can direct our compassion and our love to those of us who suffered or suffer with suicidal thoughts, and all of those who have committed suicide. We ask you, Jesus, that your love be bestowed upon them and surround them with love and light and hope, so they can shine through you, and that we can all eventually be able to say in Paul's words, "It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Thank you, Lord, for another hour in communion with you. And may our hearts be with you forever and ever. So be it.